Are you ready to explore the frontier of UAP science and technology? Join us February 7th and 8th for the 2026 UAP Detection and Tracking Summit, a premier 2-day virtual conference bringing together the world's leading researchers, technologists, policymakers, and citizen scientists, all focused on advancing how we detect, track, and understand unidentified aerial phenomena. From cutting-edge sensor technology to collaborative frameworks and actionable strategies, this summit is your gateway into the science behind UAP detection and tracking. Hear from top voices including Congressman Eric Burleson, Stanford pathologist Dr. Gary Nolan, aerospace strategist James Fowler, UAP historian Richard Dolan, and Ryan Graves, former U.S. Navy pilot and founder of Americans for Safe Aerospace, plus dozens of more experts from academia, industry, and research will tackle sessions on flight safety, international collaboration, data infrastructure, and public engagement. Don't miss this opportunity to be a part of the conversation shaping the future of UAP science. And right now, if you use my affiliate page, you get 35% off tickets by using the code SUMMIT35. Head on over to ryansprague.pursuingx.com and use the code SUMMIT35. Once again, that's ryansprague.pursuingx.com and use the code SUMMIT35 for 35% off tickets. A link is in the show notes as well. The 2026 UAP Detection and Tracking Summit. Understanding begins with detection.
Spectrovision Radio.
While our government's official position is not to speculate on this subject, we can choose to let our minds explore other possibilities, to use our imaginations. For if we consider that astroscientists agree on one point, that the possibility of life elsewhere is not only quite probable, some feel it is there without a doubt. Let us suppose then that these objects are real space vehicles, extraterrestrial in origin, and not an illusion of the mind.
I'm Ryan Sprague, and you are now somewhere in the skies. Welcome everyone to Somewhere in the Skies. I am your host, Ryan Sprague, and I have been waiting a very long time to connect with who we'll be speaking to with today, and that is Philip Mantle. He is one of my favorite UFO researchers over in the UK. He has done everything from investigating UFO crashes, landings, close encounters, the alien autopsy as well, which we'll have to talk to him about on another episode. But today we're here to talk about his book, and that is UFO Landings UK. Now, a lot of people know the Rendlesham Forest incident, but the UK has a very rich history with UFO landings, a rich history that I was not fully aware of until I looked at this huge compilation that Philip has brought to us in the form of his book. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him in for the very first time to Somewhere in the Skies. Philip, welcome to Somewhere in the Skies.
Oh, my pleasure. Good evening, Ryan.
Before we talk landings, I always have to ask first-time guests, for those who may not be familiar with you, with your work, the quintessential origin story. How did you get involved with UFOs?
Yeah.
That one that you're probably used to answering.
It's a long time ago, Ryan. I mean, when I was, a young fella at high school, I had 3 or 4 interests. I mean, I'd always had an interest in all things paranormal. I mean, literally. And I was also interested in the space race at that time, and horror movies. But the paranormal was top of the list. And I was fortunate in some respects that literally the other side of the street from where I lived, my best friend's grandmother lived there. And she used to go to a local spiritualist church. So I tagged along a few times. I've just found it fascinating. I didn't necessarily believe everything they were saying, but I still found it fascinating. I was interested in the space race and astronomy, and I read one astronomy book. I can't remember the title of it all these years later, but it had one chapter in it about UFOs, and it basically dismissed the subject, which I found rather odd, to be honest, Ryan, because elsewhere in this book, there was lots of theoretical things about, astronomy. And I thought, well, you can theorize about astronomical phenomena, but you don't accept the UFO phenomena. I found it peculiar. But nonetheless, that sparked the interest. So I left high school at the age of 16 with no qualifications, didn't know what I was going to do with myself. But this interest was there. So I read what I could about it, which wasn't a lot you could get your hands on in those days. And then in late 1978, I went to work in what was then West Germany. Over the winter, I worked there. Couldn't speak a word of the language. So I phoned my mother and said, can you send me some books? I can sit down on an evening. I can sit and watch the TV, but I can't understand it, So she sent me a box of books, and lo and behold, every single one were UFO books. I don't know where she got them from. So I would sit there on an evening and read away. So when I returned home in, I think it was March 1979, I had a bit more information, if you like. Then, of course, the Spielberg movie Close Encounters came out, and I went and watched that. And I used to live then about 5 miles from the city of Leeds in West Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. Mm-hmm. And Leeds then, as it does now, publishes an evening newspaper. It's called the Yorkshire Evening Post. Now, just around the corner from where I live, my aunt used to live, and she used to obtain a copy of this every night. And she brought it round one night, Ryan, and pointed to an advertisement in it. Coming up that Sunday was the first ever meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society in Leeds. Now, in this period of time in the UK, on a Sunday, everything used to close. I mean, literally everything. So I caught the bus. I didn't drive in those days. I caught the bus into Leeds. The location was a place called Centenary House, North Street, Leeds. In I goes. I finds the room. They'd hired a room in this building, and there was about 20 or 30 people there. Great to see a pile of books for sale. That pleased me. Now, the Yorkshire UFO Society was formed by two brothers, and that is Graham and Mark Birdsall. And they'd obviously been involved in the subject for a few years. They put on a presentation, Ryan, and, that was me. I felt, I was home. I found my niche in life. I just wanted to know more. Graham, of course, went on some years later to successfully edit and publish UFO magazine here in the UK that sold in its tens of thousands. It was a newsstand magazine. Sadly, he died, unexpectedly a few years back. But nonetheless, I felt this is it. So I actually joined the Yorkshire UFO Society. I think I paid £2 for the whole year. And we used to have monthly meetings. And by the time, the fourth or fifth meeting now, I was ready to jump in with both feet. And that's how it all started. Had it not been for that advertisement in the Yorkshire Evening Post, I would never have known about this society starting. But for me, it was the right place at the right time with the right people. I just felt very fortunate.
Wow. I love hearing those stories. Many people have a sighting. That's what gets them interested. Or like you, it's complete happenstance. I recall Stanton Friedman even saying he accidentally, I believe, received a book in the mail about UFOs, flying saucers, and it changed his life. He was
that's it. That advertisement in the Yorkshire Evening Post changed my life. Right. And I'm forever grateful for it. Because where I lived was a small town. You know, there wasn't much happening, wasn't a great deal to do. Leeds was a nice enough city, still is. But, you know, I had no formal education. The high school I went to was absolutely hopeless. But I always had this thirst for knowledge. I'll give you an example. At high school, it wasn't a church school, but once a week we used to have RI, we called it, religious instruction. So we were taught that what was in the Bible was verbatim, and this is it. And we it's only one lesson a week. And I was always the idiot at the back of the room would put his hand up and, you know, I don't think this can't be right, you know. So I think around about the same period, I literally sat down every night and read a bit of the Bible until I'd finished it. So I thought, if I'm going to get in trouble, at least I want to know what I'm getting in trouble for, you know.
Right.
So I always wanted to understand things. I wasn't happy just sat there letting other people tell me what was going on. And, that continued when I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society.
Amazing. Question everything. Question
Yeah.
everything. Well, okay. So, throughout the years, decades, you've researched many, many cases. You've investigated some personally as well. And that kind of culminated into one of many of your books. But the one we'll be talking about today is UFO Landings UK. Like I mentioned, there have been so many that I was not aware of. We know the Pinnacle cases, the Rendleshams and whatnot. Even Broadhaven, a lot of people are familiar with that one. But your book has hundreds upon hundreds. So before we even talk about some of the cases, Philip, where did these come from? How did you obtain these files, these stories?
It's a good question because, when we started, Ryan, there was no internet.
Right.
There was no online service. So when you try to research cases, you either did it in person, I mean literally in person, or you would write the old-fashioned way. You would write a letter or phone someone. I mean, these were about the only ways you could contact people. We were fortunate when I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society, as it went into the 1980s. There is a national park in North Yorkshire. It's called the Yorkshire Dales. I'd recommend every American tourist to head there. It's a beautiful part of the world, and yes, I am biased, but it's the part of the world, that parts of it where the Bronte sisters wrote Wuthering Heights and so on. But areas in and around the market town of Skipton in the Yorkshire Dales, for whatever reason, Ryan, had a lot of sightings being reported. And this is, a lot of it is what we call semi-rural. When you leave the town, there are no cities. When you leave the towns, there's villages, there's moors, especially one place called Carlton Moor, just outside of Skipton. It's heather. There are no livestock kept there. They do game bird shooting there, but that's about it. And we made it our purpose to make ourselves as visible as possible. We would leave our contact details with local police stations, libraries, even put posters up in some of the local pubs. And one of the things when people contacted, one of the things we used to ask is, how have you found us? Have you found our address or our phone number? So we knew what was working. So there was a time in the early 1980s that we were, bombarded with sightings from these areas and couldn't cope at times almost. So, I think I joined ufology at the right time. I joined with the right people, Mark and Graham Birdsall, and we were just fortunate that there was a lot of things happening for us to get our teeth into. And off we went, and we were up and running. I learned to drive, got my own transport, and there was no stopping us. It was as simple as that, and we made ourselves very, very visible. And we do lots of local lectures. I mean, we'll do the Women's Institute. You name it, just to get the word out that here we were, and that's how our information started to be gathered.
Interesting. Now, I recall in the book, you had mentioned in the introduction that you had personally investigated one of these UFO landings. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, once we got up and running, The area that I lived in was covered by another newspaper. It was called the Wakefield Express. I'm sure you've all read it.
I've got it right on my my coffee table.
Yeah, and I did a local feature in it, make you stand there holding your camera looking stupid, But they ran my phone number. And we had a lady call us, just a local lady. And she said, Philip, you won't believe me, you won't believe me. I said, well, give us a chance. No, you won't believe me, you won't believe me. Now, the area that I lived in was an industrial area, mainly coal mines. My father worked down the mines all his life. And this lady only lived a few miles away. She lived in a town called Normanton in West Yorkshire. And that was a coal mining town at that point in history. The mines have all gone now. But so myself and Mark Birdsall went to see this lady. She called Mrs. Westerman. Now, Mrs. Westerman lived in a cul-de-sac, and there was no houses opposite. And her house was a terraced house, but it was what we call an elevated house. So you walked up some steps to get into the front door. At the bottom of the road, at the end of the cul-de-sac, were some trees, some fields, and some electricity pylons that came from the nearby power station at Ferrybridge. Now, she had several children. I think there was about 5 of them, and it was just after lunch, and they were outside playing a ball game. It was a beautiful sunny day, and it was a made-up ball game. It's the same kind of thing I played when I was their age. And she was actually washing the dishes after lunch. And one of the children came running in and said, Mum, there's an airplane crashed in the field. So she came out the front door, and because it's an elevated house, Ryan, she could actually see from a front door across these fields. She said, Philip, it wasn't any airplane. It was something shaped like a Mexican hat, but like a silver grey in colour on the ground. So she got hold of the children. They walked down to the bottom of the cul-de-sac, through the trees. Now, at one point, you go down a little dip, so you lose sight of the field above you. So they walked up the other side, and this field was bordered by a small fence. This thing is sat there on the ground, but now there are 3 tall men, all wearing white suits. They had some kind of visor over their face. She was that close, she could say. They didn't have gloves on. They had mittens. And they were waving something over the ground. One of the children tried to climb the fence, but she held him back. And at this point, these 3 beings walked to the back of this thing. It then rose up, stopped in the air, and bump, was gone whence it came in a flash. No noise, nothing. So she went home, and she sat down that night to watch the local TV news. So it's going to be on the TV. It's bound to be. There's a major motorway passes Normanton. It's called the M62. Thousands of cars go by. It was a beautiful sunny day. Lots of people out and about. Not a thing. I mean, nothing. She bought the local newspaper. Nothing. She even went and asked some of her neighbours if they'd seen anything. And not a thing at all. Now, Mark and I interviewed Mrs. Westerman. We interviewed all the children. They didn't call it a spaceship or aliens. And they just said these tall men, this funny shaped thing. We even interviewed one of the children's friends. He hadn't seen anything, but he'd gone home for lunch. And when he came back, everything was over with. And he was a bit upset because he'd missed it all. He'd missed the excitement.
Right.
And she was mystified. I mean, she was perplexed by what she saw in the first place, but she was even more perplexed by the fact that no one else seemed to have seen anything. And she couldn't get that out of her head. Like I said, she lived in a mining town, kind of people I grew up with all my life. We couldn't find any logical explanation for this sighting, and we did try. So she was either lying or telling the truth, and I could find no reason why she would be lying. She didn't want any publicity, wouldn't allow a photograph to be taken. We wrote this item up in our own publication that we made at the time, but we weren't even allowed to use her name. And what's peculiar, a couple of years back, I did a podcast for someone, and I told this story, but I just forgot to use the lady's name. It's Mrs. Westerman. I thought, I just forgot. And I got an email from a lady in New Zealand. And she said, Philip, I used to live in Normanton. I've now immigrated to New Zealand. What was the lady's name? And I said, it was Mrs. Westerman. She says, my best friend was called Westerman. And she still lives there, but she's changed her name because she's got married. So she emailed her friend, and her friend was one of those children we interviewed all them years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I got in touch with her, and she confirmed, what she remembered. And, but still, it seems almost, Ryan, that you had to be in that place at that time to have experienced this. Oh, I'm just saying that it's just an opinion of mine. But even all these years later, we were, the children now grown up and had our own family, of course, confirmed that it did happen. They didn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, Philip, we're pulling your leg," And what it did for me, Ryan, I don't know if I really needed it, but it cemented my belief in the UFO phenomenon. And I thought, I'm not wasting my time here. There is something worthy of further research and investigation. It's my time to waste anyway, but, it wasn't a waste of time. There was something to it after all, especially the people that reported this. They were the kind of people I'd grown up with all my life. I knew them. My father was a coal miner. I had friends work down at the mines. I had other family members did. So I know that's not scientific or anything like that, but it's the kind of community I grew up in. And, so landing cases as a result of Mrs. Westerman's account on my doorstep, a couple of miles up the road, just always were there in the back of my mind, irrespective of what else I was dealing with or whatever else would come my way. That was already in the file. And it continued to grow as the decades went by. But that's that's the one that started it all, really.
Wow.
And make of it what you will. Yeah. It was a beautiful sunny day, everybody out and about, a huge motorway going past. Nobody. I mean, we've run this feature in the local newspaper here a couple of times, hoping that somebody else might step forward, but no one. So as far as we're aware, the Westerman family were the only ones to see it.
Wow.
But there you go. Yeah.
I love that. I love hearing that. And you're right. There's a gut feeling in a lot of UFO investigations. There's many ways to look at a case, scientifically, spiritually, even psychologically. And then you also have, this just idea of, I trust this person. There's no reason for them to have made this up. Like you said, these were the types of people you grew up with. These are modest, humble people. They have nothing to gain by telling a story like this. So then you're left wondering, this probably happened, but what was it? And we may never know. And that's frustrating in some ways and exciting in others, because then, like you said, it leads you to that curiosity of these UFO landings. And then boom, an entire new door is opened for you and hundreds of cases start to spill in. And that's what I liked about the book is you kind of, you compartmentalize these into decades, which I really liked, 40s, 50s, 60s. And a lot of us here in the United States, when we think of the modern UFO era, it always begins with Kenneth Arnold, the flying saucer story, the classic story. But in your book, you actually start with a lot of cases pre Kenneth Arnold that I was not aware of. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners aren't aware of.
Yeah.
Either.
I mean, we always use Kenneth Arnold as the yardstick, but that's when flying saucers became, into popular culture. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I remember, again, I moved a few miles away. And again, I did some years later, I did another local newspaper piece. Mm-hmm. And a gentleman by the name of John Warren contacted me. He was an oldish boy. He'd retired, but he lived nearby. So I went to speak to Mr. Warren because it was literally, a mile or so from where I lived. And he recounted an event back in 1942, before Kenneth Arnold. Obviously, it was during wartime, the Second World War. Mr. Warren was in the Royal Air Force and stationed at a place called RAF Ludham in Norfolk, in the UK. And he couldn't remember the exact date, but he thinks it was May. And he'd been out to a local dance, and it was some 12 miles from the airbase. And he was a bit late, and he missed the last train back. So there was no other option in 1942 but to walk. And not only that, he was going to get in trouble for being late, not absent without leave, but he was going to be in for it if they found out. So he sets off to walk back. He's nearing the town of Ludham and the airbase when he encounters up ahead of him a peculiar looking humanoid, just stood at the side of the road, and it had a box on its chest, and it was shining green light out of the top of this box. I don't know if you ever did it when you were a youngster yourself, Ryan. You call it a flashlight. We call it a torch, and put it under your chin, and the light all shoots up. It makes your face look funny,
Right. Yeah.
It was the early days of apps that you now have on the phone to make your face look funny. Or you just get old and grey like me, and it ends up looking funny anyway, But this light was shining up in its face, and he said it had a peculiar grin on its face. But behind it, there was also a dome-shaped object that was illuminated as well. And it scared the living daylights out of him. Remember, this is 1942. It's, the middle of the war. And although I didn't put it in the book, because he asked me not to write this, but he said, had he been armed at the time, had he had his sidearm with him, he would have shot it. Because this was wartime, and he knew it wasn't anything to do with the RAF or the army. So, i.e., it must be the enemy. And he said he would have shot it. But it didn't do anything. He scarpered pretty quickly. And luckily for him, he managed to get back into the barracks through a window. His friend let him in through a window. And he says, I told my friend, and he was, startled by it. So in the mid 1960s, I think it was, Mr. Warren had also reported the sighting to the British UFO Research Association. So I managed to access their file and find his letter. But it was nice to be able to speak to him in person about something that happened pre-Arnold. And it obviously still bothered him because he contacted me when he saw me in the local newspaper. He still wanted to talk about it all those years later. And it's just another fascinating little landing case that nobody's ever heard of. It's been languishing in somebody's files. But the good thing was I got to speak to him in person. So you're not just reading bits of paper. You could feel the fascination that this old boy had. And of course, the era that we're talking about, it was, the wartime. And I can honestly believe him if he would have shot it. I can honestly believe that. We'll laugh about it. It sounds the obvious thing to do to me. This is not us, therefore it must be the enemy. I'm going to shoot the damn thing. And it's right outside the RAF base where he was stationed. So, make of it what you will. I mean, it just gives you one example that if you dig, these are the type of things that come to the surface.
Wow. Yeah, that is a fascinating case. And, this idea of, it's a potential threat, especially around a military base, which there were several of those in the book that you spoke of. And that lends a lot of credibility for a lot of people who don't, research UFOs like you and I do on a daily basis. When they hear that military people are witnessing these. Pilots, people on the ground, radar operators. That seems to be what really catches people's
Yeah.
attention.
Well, Mr. Warren
It's
was
interesting.
responsible for arming 2 squadrons of fighter aircraft at
wow.
RAF London. So he wasn't just a T-boy. He wasn't the colonel either, but he wasn't. And like I said, he had no option but to walk home that night. That once you missed the last train, that was it. It was not. So it was 12 miles. And he said, I hadn't been on the drink, because there wasn't a lot of it anyway, and we didn't have a lot of money either. I think he'd been, in all honesty, he'd been chasing the ladies at the dance, but that's another story, But, fascinating. And it makes you wonder, Ryan, when you come across cases like this, it makes you think, well, what others are there out there that we are totally unaware of? And I'll give you an example. It's not in the book. As you mentioned in the introduction, I was involved in the alien autopsy film research. And I made a little 4-part TV documentary series about it. And it was broadcast last year. And a local gentleman contacted me on email. He said, I've got something I'd like to show you, Philip. And so when the COVID lockdown had finished, he paid me a visit. And this was the memoirs of his wife's grandfather. Like I said, this area used to be a big coal mining area. He was actually a mining engineer, so not a digger of coal, but he used to design the lift shafts and the loading gear and all this kind of thing. And before he died, he typed up his memoirs. They weren't extensive, and as a young boy, he used to live near Manchester, which is about 40 miles from here, not that far. And these memoirs were in 2 parts. One was about his life, where he grew up, his family. The second part was about his life as a mining engineer. And this chap said the second half is dreadfully boring, unless you're heavily into mining engineering. This is don't. But in the other part, when he was 9 years old, I believe, 8 or 9, there is a chapter and it just says the encounter. And it's the largest chapter in the whole memoirs. He printed these things out himself and just gave them to family members. So there were only about 10 copies he ever made. So he talks about an encounter in 1911. And him and his friend were on the way to a local park. They had to walk to it. Children didn't get run around in cars in those days. And he said, we came to this clearing and there's this thing's on the ground, like a cigar-shaped thing on the ground. And they went up to it, it opened up, and there were beings, humanoid beings, looked at what we probably describe as Asian, wearing colored clothing and even a headgear that looked something like a turban. And they communicated with them and conversed with them, and then off they went. And he reported it to his parents when he got home, and they didn't do anything about it. But this was the largest chapter in this gentleman's memoirs.
Wow.
And nobody knew anything about it. I mean, I put this gentleman's name in on Google. I think I found one mention of him, and that was it. Nothing to do with UFOs. And I managed to get an old photograph of him, but nothing, not a whisper. And this was 1911, the early part of the 20th century, before the First World War.
Right.
And it had just been sat gathering dust. I was only disappointed that I didn't get to meet the old boy and speak to him, in person. And this gentleman let me take a copy of this file, and I have it, but it's not in the book. But I thought I'd mention that because it's an example. We just said, what else is lying around out there that we're not aware of, and here was one. Again, it came about because I appeared on TV, And he must have Googled me and he thought, oh, he only lives up there. I'm easy enough to find, you know. I'm not living in some hobbit land in a little round house, you know. And I was forever thankful. And I published the story in a couple of magazines, and I sent this gentleman copies of it. And it was, you know, to share with the family. But very bizarre, very strange. But it shows you what else may be lying around that we're unaware of these strange accounts, you know. And make of it what you will. You know, there's a lot more to the story than that. But you know, I can't remember it all offhand. B, we're limited for time anyway. But it's an example. That is something that's only in 10 copies of an old boy's memoirs, and you will not find it anywhere else.
Very interesting. Again, I like the way you think about these things, Philip, of, you know, how many lost chapters are there to memoirs out there, or you know, reports that never made it to an organization or to the FAA or to the local law enforcement. You know, that old saying of, like, you know, 95% of people have probably seen something unexplained in the sky, but 2% maybe report it somewhere. So we can only imagine the untold stories that are out there. So that's really fascinating.
Well, people say to me, how do you find out these things, Philip? Well, I always say my mum, God rest her soul, she always used to say to me, you'll never get lost so long as you have a tongue in your head. In other words, ask, just ask. And when you ask the simplest of questions, right, it's amazing of what the answers are that come back, especially when you're dealing with these things and what things you find. I know I've given you examples here where I've been in the local media and somebody's contacted me, but a lot of the times we were just doing the asking, you know, and putting ourselves out there and saying, have you seen anything? If you have, come and tell us.
Come and tell us. And I mean, again, hundreds of landings have occurred. Are there any more, Philip, that you find extra notable that you'd like to share with us here throughout the decades?
Well, you know, one of the busiest times for UFOs, full stop, was just before I got involved in the UK. I'm talking about, and it's the sort of late 1970s. And I think you mentioned it anyway. There's an incident that took place in what's called Decmont Woods in Livingston in Scotland, and it was the late 1970s. I think it was 1979, and it involved a local gentleman by the name of Robert Taylor. Mr. Taylor was a forestry worker, hence it happening in Decmont Woods. He set off to go to work from Livingston, and the woods were up on a hill, you know, beyond where he lived, in his truck with his dog. And he was a very down-to-earth gentleman, was Mr. Taylor, and he's walking down through these woods, and there's a small clearing, and as he comes to this clearing, there is this thing there, sat on the ground. It is dome-shaped. It has what he described as a flange going around the bottom of it, and on this flange were little pointers sticking up with like a helicopter blade on them. And either from the back of this thing or from underneath it rolled these two large balls, black balls with spikes on. He said they reminded him of the old World War II mines they used out at sea. And they literally plopped across you could hear them plopping across the ground because it was muddy as they came towards him. He felt a tug on either side of his trousers, in the middle of his thighs, but outside there was a high-pitched whistling sound, a smell of sulfur, and he was out cold. I mean, literally out cold. When he came around, you know, his dog is doing somersaults, and this thing has gone. I mean, literally. So he staggered to his truck, tried to drive it, and managed to just get it into a ditch. So it wasn't far to where he lived. So he staggered down home, knocked on the door, and his wife's there. And she says, "What's the matter? What's happened?" You know, he's looking a bit disheveled, a bit dirty. And he says, "I've been attacked." So she phones the police. You know, and the police come and he tells them. And when the police go to the location, it's exactly where he told them to go. There are these strange marks in the ground. There's two that look like caterpillar marks and some other indentations around them. Fortunately for the police and UFO investigators, it was cold that night. I believe it even might have had a bit of snow, so it froze the muddy ground. So these imprints were frozen in place. And photographs were taken. The police even drew a sketch of these marks. And because Mr. Taylor was such an upstanding member of the community, the police actually carried out a forensic investigation. And it's the only official forensic police investigation of a UFO sighting anywhere in the UK.
Oh, wow.
And they confirmed that Mr. Taylor's trousers were torn where he felt these things pulling on him, went right through, and these were heavy duty work trousers. They confirmed that they were consistent with a upward pulling motion, and they conducted a full report. And I have a copy of that police report. Again, there's a motorway runs nearby from Edinburgh to Glasgow. Livingston's kind of in the middle of those. If you're trying to picture it on a map, it's not an out of the way place, in the middle of nowhere. And I was fortunate. My colleague Malcolm Robinson from Scotland was on site within no time at all. And Malcolm has written the definitive book on this. I mean, it is a fantastic book. So just look out for that if you're interested. But I went with Malcolm many years later to interview Mr. Taylor. And this is an interesting little story. He told us the account just as he'd done with everybody else, and we thanked him for the time. And Malcolm and I set off up to Deckmont Woods. And, the trees had grown somewhat in the years that had passed. But we found the location and we're taking some photographs. But it wasn't, if you didn't know where you were going, Ryan, you wouldn't have known anything about it. It's just trees.
Right.
So I said to Malcolm, they now put a picnic bench there. The local council put a picnic bench. So when you get a brass plaque made, I just screw it onto the side of the picnic bench, So Malcolm went to the local council with this idea. And instead of that, they put a huge, great rock there with a big plaque on it, commemorating the event.
Oh, wow.
And I think just the other year, they've gone a stage further now and put signposters and things explaining it, and not that they're going to get thousands of tourists like they do in Roswell, but there are maps there and it will take you to the location. And that just came as an off the cuff remark between Malcolm and I, and fair play to him. Malcolm took the idea up and ran with it, and he's done a great job. But it's again, fascinating case. Was forensically, I have to emphasize that word, forensically investigated by the police, and they could find no explanation for it. Again, he wasn't lying. He had no idea. One of the curious things about this, and it's I forgot to mention it myself, is that when Mr. Taylor is looking at this object on the ground, the dome, if you like, is part of it was transparent, but that transparency moved, didn't stay all in one place. And we're not looking at a transparent dome. That transparency moved around the top of this dome, and it's I can't figure that out at all. It's very puzzling indeed. And but there is a lot more involved in the case than I've highlighted. But just look for Malcolm's book, Malcolm Robinson. You'll not be disappointed, I can assure you. But it's another fascinating case. This one has appeared in the newspapers. It has appeared on television, but it's not widely well known like Rendlesham, or you won't find any mention of Rendlesham Forest in my new book at all, because there are countless books about it, so I didn't need to write about that. I couldn't have done it justice just in just one chapter. But the Deckmont Woods case, or Livingston, or Robert Taylor, is fascinating. And again, I was glad to meet the man himself. I was actually researching my first book, when I spoke to Mr. Taylor, way back in 1994, I co-authored a book called Without Consent, which dealt with abductions and missing time cases, again, only here in the UK, nowhere else. And there was a period of missing time that Mr. Taylor couldn't account for. So that's why I went to interview him. But he'd never explored it any further. It was just, I don't know, I was out cold. I don't know what happened, and I tried to drive my truck and that ended up in a ditch, So, but I was glad I got to speak to him. I really am. And he was again, Ryan, I know it doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but he was such a down-to-earth gentleman. He really was. He had his job, his wife, his family, and his dog, and that's all he was really interested in, And he was bewildered by the whole event. Even right up to the day he died, I believe he was still, had no idea what happened to him that day.
Wow. Again, posing that question, why? Why would someone make something like this up? There's absolutely nothing to gain. He didn't want notoriety. He reported it to the only people he thought he could, and that's the police. His wife did, and that makes sense. So,
yeah,
he said, that is a great case.
I've been attacked. So if you've been attacked, what do you do? Just
Call
the
the
logical thing, call the police.
You're right.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, and I do want to talk about, there is this subset in the UFO field when it comes to landings or close encounters where school children are involved. And that seems to be a really big thing. More cases than I ever thought actually existed. And we will get there. But before we get to that pinnacle case in Broadhaven, Philip, are there any other cases in the book that you really want to share with us now? You have a chapter called The X-Files, which of course is near and dear to my heart.
I'll go back in time to the 70s again, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Because one of the things I talk about in the book is the term that the late Alan Hynek came up with, and that's high strangeness.
Yes.
And as far as he was concerned, the stranger these cases were, the closer you got to the objects, then the less likely it is that it's a misidentification. We all know, Ryan, that most UFO sightings at the end of the day have a conventional explanation. But when you're up close and personal to these things, it's very difficult to say it was an airplane or it was a star or planet or whatever other excuse. Even Hynek fell foul of that, didn't he, with the swamp gas? And he admitted he got that wrong many years later. But there's a place, and I can't pronounce it correctly, so it's in Wales. Now, the Welsh language is, one of a kind, really. It's a place called Mantle in Wales. And it involved a young boy called Trevor. We've never released his surname. It happened on July the 22nd, 1975. And he was with his father. And they were heading for the coast and the beach. And behind the beach was this large hill. And, Trevor, being an adventurous young man, thought, I'm up here. So he it wasn't anything dangerous. He scrambled up the rocks. And when he got to the top, he was amazed that there was this dome-shaped object with lights all around it, actually there amongst the rocks. And it was dome-shaped. This dome was transparent. And what makes it even more high strangeness is the creatures that he saw in it. There were two creatures that he called jellymen. They seemed as if they were, bobbling away inside them, all moving, this mass moving inside of them. Mm-hmm. And it frightened the hell out of him. He ran down the rocks, yelled to his father, and then turned around and ran back up. And his father thought he was playing some kind of game. But when his father looked up, he could see Trevor hiding behind a rock. So he's climbed these rocks and he's hiding behind it and bobbing up to look at these things. So he hid behind the rock again. And when he gone back, this thing has gone, And it is totally bizarre what Trevor described. I can't find anything in the UFO literature that matches what we call jellymen.
Yeah.
And I had to use it. It's a case that some of us older researchers here in the UK are aware of, but by no means everybody. And it shows you how really strange some of these incidents are. This is 1975. So it's, there are science fiction movies that have been out there, but he hasn't got this from any science fiction story that I'm aware of that made the headlines in Wales, as a young lad. And it is extremely peculiar. It really is. And, like anything else, I don't try and indoctrinate with anything that I do, Ryan. I just say, here it is. You can decide for yourself. You've got a brain in your head. You don't need me to tell you what to do or what to think. Make of it what you will. But it shows, again, the bizarre nature of some of these encounters. Because if we believe the tabloid press that it's all the same no matter where you go, things that are reported are the little grey guys. And the only people that report them are, hicks out in the middle of the New Mexico desert, but no, they're not. This was on a beach in Wales, and some rocks behind the beach. So, yeah, RAF base in 1942, right outside the RAF base, it's just, and it makes me scratch my head, it's some of these cases when you look into them, you think, well, I can't deny it, but it's so bizarre. And that's one example of it. That when we talk about high strangeness, his father didn't see the thing, but his father saw him hiding behind the rock. He hid behind this rock and he kept popping up. Because at one point, this dome started to open. And that's when he ran. Because he thought, these things are coming out.
I don't blame him, yeah.
No, but there you go. But again, people have said, well, why were things so active in the late 1970s in the UK? And my answer is, I don't know. I just do not know. But if you've gone through archives and files like I have, not only was it very active in the late 1970s, these high strangeness cases were very active in the late 1970s. Some people, obviously skeptical, say it's because Star Wars, Close Encounters, but for me that doesn't explain it all. It can't explain it. It's a nice try, but no cigar. But there you go. So that case is in the book, and you can read for it. There's a picture of what was drawn, an artist's impression. Make of it what you will.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we should mention too, in the book, you have many detailed witness sketches and of craft of humanoids. And that alone was very interesting to just skim through the book and look at like you mentioned, the bizarre nature of some of these beings, a jelly being, and these beings with boxes, the way they're described, it truly makes you wonder, how many different intelligences are we dealing with? How many different phenomena? How high strangeness do these actually get? And what can we say about the witnesses and their perception of these things as well? It's interesting.
I mean, that's where the answers lie in those questions you've just posed, And I have another kind of a favorite case, but in the late 1970s, early 1980s, we had a well-known pop group in the UK called Hot Chocolate. And it was,
Love it.
It was, led by a black guy called Errol Brown, who was a beautiful voice, great singer, but well-known. In 1980, they released a song called No Doubt About It. And when you listen to the song, it's on YouTube, you'll find it, Hot Chocolate, No Doubt About It. They're singing about a flying saucer landing. And the video they made to go with it, is all spacey and what have you. And I just thought it was just a pop song that somebody had written and made up. But I found out that it's actually based on a real event. Now, none of the members of the pop group Hot Chocolate saw anything. But the two people that wrote the song actually did. And one of them is called Steve Glenn. And I managed to get hold of Steve when I was researching the book and speak to him. He's still active in the music business. He was a singer himself. I think he even went to #1 in Japan at one point with one of his songs, but he was more of a songwriter. And he wrote a lot of songs for a lot of the well-known pop stars in the UK in that era. And they were in the south of England, and they were heading for the recording studio one night, him and his friend in a car, and they had another pop group following along behind them in a van. When they saw this peculiar thing, it's a huge, great thing. So he pulled over at the side of the road, and they ducked down behind some bushes because this thing came to ground. And he said he shot out these little spheres, almost as if they were like attacking them. So, they even phoned the police when this, and the police came out and spoke to them. It was too late. This thing had gone by then. So Steve told me, he said, we went home that night and we sat down, him and his partner, and they wrote the song, No Doubt About It, in about 10 minutes. And I think it was Hot Chocolate's best-selling single. It sold zillions of them all over the world. Obviously not in the, So that is in the book. That is in the book. There's a pop song inspired by a real event. And in fact, I spoke to Steve Glenn just the other day, telling him the book's out, and I needed his address to send him a copy because I always said I would, and he gave me his address, and he's now got it. So there you go.
That's amazing.
We even have a pop song inspired by a real event. I just thought it was a made-up song, like they do, Ryan.
Yeah,
but no, it's based on a UFO landing case here in the UK.
Right. And, like you said, written in 10 minutes, all you need for your lyrics is your witness testimony of what happened, and throw some rhythm behind it, and you got a pop song. Hey guys, Ryan Sprague here from Somewhere in the Skies. The podcast has always been and always will be completely free for you to listen to. But creating it every week takes a lot of time, research, and resources. And to be honest, it's just never been free for me to create. That's why we built a few simple ways for you to help support the show and keep it going strong. You can join us over on Patreon or through Apple Premium. Both offer the same awesome perks. Ad-free episodes, early access to new content, exclusive bonus shows, and even priority to ask our guests your listener questions. It's a quick and easy way to support what we do for just a few bucks a month. And right now, you can even try Patreon for free for a week to see if it's right for you. To learn more and to join, head over to patreon.com/somewhereskies. That's patreon.com/somewhereskies. Or hit that subscribe button right at the top of your Apple Podcast feed. Thank you so much for listening, for supporting, and as always, keep looking up. Well, let's, I guess, kind of bookend this with probably one of the most well-known UFO landings in the UK, and this was in Wales. This was part of a what many consider a UFO flap. A lot of things were happening in Wales at the time, but this is probably one of the most prominent that I know of here in the States, and that is the Broadhaven incident. Like I mentioned earlier, school children involved. A lot of people know the Rua Zimbabwe case in the 90s, but this case actually is a little lesser known here. So if you don't mind, could you tell us a little about this case and what you found out about it?
I mean, Wales itself as a country, is only a small place. It's the western bit that sticks out from the UK. And Broadhaven, this happened on February the 4th, 1977. And as we were saying earlier, a lot of things seem to be happening in the 1970s here in the UK. And it involved 14 children, 14 at school, at the local school in Broadhaven. We used to call it playtime, but, it was a break at school. And they saw this a silver metallic object, land outside. with it had some kind of thing on the top, and I believe there were, I think, 6 of the children actually reported seeing humanoid figures, and they were silver suited. And the only sort of facial description that the children were described, they said that these creatures had big ears, and fortunately, they were all sat down and drew pictures of these things, and we have some of the original drawings reproduced in my book. It was also reported to the Ministry of Defence here in the UK, who did indeed look into it, not extensively, but they did look into it. The local police were involved, but other things were happening in and around Wales at the time. Lots of sightings, to such an extent that this area got nicknamed the Broadhaven Triangle. So within this specific geographical area, there was a lot of sightings. But as I mentioned, throughout the UK in the late 1970s, there were a lot of weird and wonderful things. And I don't know about you, Ryan, but I've lectured at schools, and I find the youngsters probably ask the better questions than the grown-ups. And of course, most of them don't have the vices that we adults accumulate down the years.
Right.
And they can be very honest. I mean, I've got 2 daughters, and I take my youngest daughter when she was little. She would be so honest. She was blunt, because she said, "Well, you always told me to tell the truth, Dad." And I said, "Yeah, and I know sometimes, but if somebody's ugly, you don't have to tell them, So I think sometimes the children are the best witnesses, because they just say it as they see it. They haven't got the vices that we have. And that is a prime example here with Broadhaven. And it's sad, really, that it's kind of disappeared from the public domain. It would be, I haven't been able to do it, but I haven't tried, I'm going to be honest, to speak to some of these children now that they've grown up. I'm sure, they were only youngsters in 1977, so hopefully some of them would still be around, but it would be fascinating to speak to them now. Like I did with the children in Normanton, we found one of them was introduced to me, just a couple of years back, and she still reported the same thing, Ryan. And I believe, like you mentioned, the aerial school sighting in the 90s in Zimbabwe, they're all grown up and adults now, and some of those have been interviewed. Westall in Australia in 1966, Shane Ryan's done a great job with that, and they, he's spoken to a lot of the children now that are adults, and even I think one of the teachers was also involved at that time. So schoolyard sightings, if you like, are a bit more common than perhaps we would imagine, and that's just one example is the Broadhaven sightings. And there's lots of drawings that went with it. I couldn't really have room to reproduce them all, but I've put a good example of them in the book. And I think observations by children per se are fascinating. But when it comes to things like this, people will always say, "Oh, the kids are making it up." What for? It's usually one child and his mate will come up with a crazy idea, and that's how it used to work when I was young. Me and my best friend got up to some mischief, but it was never the whole school, Right. So, but yeah, I mean, you're right to flag it up, Ryan, because it is a fascinating story, as are the other, what we call schoolyard sightings as well. And it'd be interesting to see if in the coming years there aren't a few more that come out of the woodwork. Are the contemporary ones that happens now, or things that are, stuck in somebody's filing cabinet and forgotten about? We shall see.
We shall see. Yeah. Let's hope for the best. Well, I want to ask you this, Philip. With a lot of these cases, you mentioned the high strangeness aspect, what these humanoids look like, the craft landing and then taking off. But my big question when it comes to any of these landings, that it seems the beings come out, maybe they hang around for a couple minutes and then leave, What do you think, if you had to guess, what is the purpose of these landings? Are they
Yeah.
surveying the
Well,
Earth? Are they here to invade? What do you think the purpose is?
Well, if we come to a conclusion that way, we have to agree that these are beings from another world, and I would say we don't know as yet what these things are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people will know that I'm a publisher. I run a small outfit called Flying Disc Press. And the second book I ever published was by a Romanian scientist called Dr. Dan Farkas. It was simply called UFOs over Romania.
Mm-hmm.
Dan's second book was his hypotheses of what UFOs are. And he calls it hypercivilizations, because it's the very question, the very thing you just pointed out there that puzzles Dan more than anything, is that he calls them the UFOnauts, do stupid things. You know, they come, they fiddle around, and they're gone. You know, leaving the poor bemused witnesses behind scratching their heads. And what I'm not saying he's right or wrong. I'm not saying I agree with him, but it made me think. He said he honestly believes we are being visited by an intelligence not of this earth. Where it comes from, how it gets here, no idea. But on the evolutionary scale, he estimates that it's not a few thousand years in advance of us. It's actually millions of years in advance. And no matter how hard, we humans try, we're simply not able to understand it. We're not high enough up the evolutionary ladder yet to figure it out. And it gives an idea. It says, you take a flat screen television and stick it in an ant's nest. Now, the ants will know it's there. They'll crawl all over it. Maybe some of the soldier ants might even attack it. But never in a million years will they be able to figure out what the hell it is, what it's made of, and what its purpose is. So maybe on that scale, we are the evolutionary ants. That is the difference between us. And of course, that's one of the parameters in the Drake equation. The astronomer Drake, and about the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. And one of them is the age of civilizations. That's one of the things that make up the Drake equation. Now, we as a species, never mind a civilization, we have as a species have only been around for, in the blink of an eye. The dinosaurs ruled the earth for millions of years before they were wiped out. Mankind is, we haven't been here for 2 minutes, really. So you imagine, let's assume that we don't wipe ourselves out one way or another, that mankind survives for the next billion years. What will we look like? What will our technology be? I mean, forget Star Trek, we're beyond all that. You look what we've done since the Wright brothers first flew at Kitty Hawk. Within a generation, we went from flying at Kitty Hawk to landing on the moon. So, you stick a billion years on the top of that, and just think what will be like technology. And so there may be a civilization or civilizations out there already at that point, that they evolved or were created, whichever way you want to believe, a billion years ago. And they've stumbled across us, swarming about on this little planet, and shown an interest, but we're too dumb to figure out what it is. And it makes you wonder. For example, you could also look at the next most intelligent creature on Earth is the dolphin. And scientists believe that the dolphins have a rudimentary language. But yet we can't say, hello, Flipper, how you doing? How do you feel today? We can teach you to jump up and catch a fish. We can't converse with them. And so we don't know, when they look up out of the water and they see us, what do they think? I mean, they're self-aware. I think, therefore I am. The dolphins are self-aware. So what do they think about us when they're looking up out of the water? But imagine that expand that between us and another civilization elsewhere. So I don't know, but it just made me think. It really did make me think. And because if you think about it, if you and I were astronauts and we landed on a planet and we found another civilization, another life form, we wouldn't just piddle around and then leave it. you know,
I'm out of there.
you know.
Good point. Yeah,
But
it's a good
you know,
analogy. Yeah.
yeah, it's just food for thought. And all I would say is to anyone, the information is out there. Just pick it up, have a look at it, and draw your own conclusions. And I think people like me and my colleagues. One of the things, our purpose is to record this information, though, that hopefully somebody somewhere will be able to make sense of it all. It's a bit like the early astronomers. They were recording things. People saying, "I don't know what this is." For example, I think it was 150 years ago, stones couldn't fall from the skies. You look up into the sky, Ryan, there's no stones there, is there? There's clouds and rainbows. But I think there was an event in the early part of the 19th century in France where a lot of stones did fall from the sky. And it forced the astronomers to admit, yes, we do know they fall from the sky, but we just don't know what the hell they are anyway. So maybe in ufological terms, we're at that point now. We know that UFOs exist. We know there is a UFO phenomena, but, we've got one of those rocks that's fallen from the sky. We finally admitted it, but we don't know where they come from, what it is, what it's made of, what its purpose is, etc., etc., etc. I may be totally wrong as well, of course, but it's just an idea.
I love that. You're building off of what we can now accept and hopefully globally begin to understand that, yes, there is a phenomena. Here in the United States, our government has said, yes, UFOs exist. Now it's a million questions that come after that, like you said. But it's a big...
here in our own Ministry of Defence have always admitted. Always, you go back through the MOD files, have always admitted there are things in the skies that they can't explain. But then they put a caveat on that. We didn't find, there's no threat to the air defence of the UK, therefore we're not interested. Right. And, but they've always admitted there's things in the sky they can't explain. It's nothing new.
Yeah, very good point. Well, speaking of new, Philip, what can new people who might have one of these close encounters or see a craft landing, what advice would you give to people like this if this does happen to them, if these things are truly happening?
Yeah, well, I would say, by all means report it. There's a lot of different channels now where you can report things in confidence if required. A lot of the local UFO groups that used to be here in the UK have disappeared, but they're being replaced by other online assets where you can report things again in confidence. It is vital that we add the information to the pool of knowledge that we already have. But think about it carefully. Speak to family members first. If it's something so bizarre, so frightening, you may wish to report it to the local authorities. Even the police here are still duty bound to investigate. And I mentioned there has been one full forensic investigation because of the gentleman in question. He was a well-known member of the local community, and that was, in Livingston in Scotland. And we know there are lots of independent UFO researchers as well. So you're able to do your homework like you couldn't do when I first started. You can Google somebody's name, you can have a look, you can see what they've worked on, and you're thinking that might be the right person for me, or not. There is still UFO organizations like MUFON and others in other different countries, of course. And I would say, step forward. You don't have to go public, but by all means, share what information you have with UFO research. It could be another piece of the jigsaw puzzle that you're adding. Who you never know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you're right. The more people who come forward, the more we normalize this, and the more data we can add to this growing mystery, and maybe find some answers to some of it, maybe not all of it. But hey, like you said, I'd rather have half the puzzle than no puzzle at all, at least in my
Absolutely.
lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to wrap things up, Philip, where can we find your book? Where can we find everything you're up to? And yeah, tell the folks at home how they can find you.
UFO Landings UK. You'll find it on Amazon. There's a large format softback book. There's a hardback. There's a Kindle, and we're in the process of turning it into an audio book as well. So that'll be ready at some point. And I've written a few other books, but they're all there. You just punch my name into Amazon, you'll find them. I have a little blog, although I don't write a lot on it. I just put bits and pieces on it. That's just flyingdiscpress.com. That's disc with a K. I'm on Facebook. I'm easy enough to find. You can never forget this fat old boy's face once you've seen it, will you?
Oh, stop. Well, Philip, I have to thank you for coming on Somewhere in the Skies today and for all the invaluable work you do in this field. It's truly an honor to talk to you.
It's my pleasure, Ryan. I can assure you. And let's not leave it so long till next time we speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely.